The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
The Iron Bowl of basketball, number one versus number two.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In case you haven't heard, number one playing number two. First time it's happened somehow in the history of SEC basketball. Luke Robinson, the Bama vibes going into this game are what?
Full-on excitement and euphoria, and just overall, everybody's enjoying it. I mean, look, I think there's always a bit of nervousness for Alabama when they play Auburn, just because. I mean, now some people may disagree with me and think I'm nuts, and maybe it's just because I grew up so close to Auburn, but there always is for me. But the one thing about this one that doesn't, I don't have this, the same nervousness I would normally have, the same anxiety, is because, and I'll give credit to my cohort, Jimmy Stein on Locked On Bama. He actually said this. I'm like, man, you know, it's 1 versus 2. And if Auburn's a really good team, and if they come in there and beat us, and it's good, he goes, yeah, they could come in there and beat us. And then they could blow us out in Neville Arena. They may even beat us in the SEC tournament. But this Alabama team could still win the national championship. Then what? I'm like, yeah, that's true.
That's true.
I mean, I think either one of these teams can lose this game and still win the national championship. And here's my other take, that I know that most people listening will disagree with me one way or the other, but hear me out. I think for the state of Alabama and the way that this sport is perceived in this state, it's going to behoove Alabama and Auburn, if this is a great ball game. I don't care if it's rough and tumble 61-62 or if it's high flying 102 to 101. I don't care. But if it's a good game and it's fun and game day's been there and the nation's watching it and it's sort of Duke-ish, North Carolina-ish, and it's just everything, I think it elevates the perception of basketball in this state. Whereas if Alabama wins by 20 or Auburn wins by 20, everybody's like, just another 1 versus 2 dud, kind of like the Super Bowl was. You know what I mean? I mean, I know a lot of people watched it, and you're not comparing this to the Super Bowl, but I'm just saying that the Super Bowls, you remember the ones that were close, and if you remember this, see, Duke and North Carolina have done this before, and they've met in an opportunity where they've had all these great games. So even though they had a dud earlier this year, that is appointment television. We aren't to appointment television yet, but this starts it if it's a good game.
I also think it allows us to kind of prove to the world that this is the best rivalry in college sports. I mean, sure that, we've got the game, and obviously, Ohio State and Michigan on the football field, that has a lot of implications, but it's just football. Same with Duke and North Carolina. Like, it's just basketball. When you look at Auburn and Alabama now, it transcends just the football field. I mean, the hate, but also this weird respect for one another. Like, I think it's across all sports. We've seen that. We've seen that in other sports, and obviously, the Iron Bowl is what it is. But with basketball now, being able to say number one versus number two, and we may see this same exact thing in a few weeks, and then we also may see it in the SEC championship. And we also may see it if it's the overall number one versus the overall number 2 seed. Like, there's a chance you see it in the Natty. And I don't know what this state would do if that happened. If these teams played 4 times, I don't know if we all could emotionally take it or not. But I do think this is a prime opportunity for Auburn and Alabama to say, this is it's cute that you guys all care about your rivalries, but this is the biggest one.
No, I think you're right. I mean, and we know as Alabama and Auburn fans, even things like baseball, and I'm not a baseball fan. I don't really like baseball. I can't stand Major League Baseball. It's just not fun to me. But when Alabama and Auburn play baseball, I pay attention.
It's not fun, Luke. Don't do it.
Exactly.
It's not fun. Don't do it, Luke.
Auburn was really good, right? I can't remember exactly how long ago. And Alabama, I think, went in there and swept them.
That's right. Yeah, a few years ago.
What was that about? And it sort of made Alabama season. And then I think the next year Auburn returned the favor. And those are the kind of things that make Alabama Auburn different from everywhere else. And then when you add in that you've got Nate Oates, who a lot of Auburn fans can't stand for whatever reason. You got Bruce Pearl, who a lot of
for whatever reason. Are you serious?
Okay, why do you hate Nate Oates? He's a good dude.
Sure, I'm sure he's just great.
I'm
sure he's a great human being, Luke. I'm sure.
God. What are you mad about that?
I'm not mad about anything. I'm not. You just can't dismiss like for whatever reason. It's like I'm aware why people don't like Bruce Pearl. I get it. Not for like whatever reason.
But I'll say that, and again, I'm going to say for whatever reason, I'm going to say this about the Bruce Pearl thing. Again, being in Ellick City a lot, I can tell you right now that Bruce Pearl has done a lot of good things around here. He's helped with the cancer center. I have learned that yes, I can distinguish that. I don't like Bruce Pearl because he's coaching at Auburn, but I respect him as a person. And he did some things way back when, Deion Thomas and the barbecue and telling parents to lie, all that stuff bad. And Nate Oates he had an incredibly poor choice of words sometimes with the Brandon Miller stuff. Occasionally he has acted like a jerk, telling LSU, to get the blank off the court and all that. That's true. All that's now. Bruce Pearl also threw his headset down in Tuscaloosa a few years ago. They've both had their moments, but that's what makes them passionate and fun. So again,
I agree with that for sure.
So I feel like those who just hate Nate Oates without knowing who he is don't really understand he's a pretty good person. Those who hate Bruce Pearl without knowing who he is, pretty good person. And look, maybe I know he gets pretty political sometimes, but you know what? If that were my religion and I felt strongly about it, I'd probably get political too.
Well, we also ask for coaches to like be honest with us and like tell us who they really are. And then when they do it, people get mad. So it's like, which one do you want? Do you want these people to just be like statues and robots and just say, the same 4 or 5 sentences? Or do you actually want to know? Do you actually want them to have a voice? So like, I think folks need to kind of decide what exactly we want in those, but both top 5 coaches in college basketball right now.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. And
look,
you also have to factor in number one, what both these two came into. Now, Auburn was a bit of a bigger mess. And that's why, yesterday on Doug Amos's show, I know you go on there on Wednesdays too. Mm-hmm. And I did. And he said, well, do you think that Bruce Pearl made Alabama have to do this? I said, I think that's kind of silly. Let me tell you why. Yes, I think Alabama probably looked at Auburn and goes, yeah, we'd like to have a better basketball program, but they tried with Anthony Grant. They tried with Avery Johnson. It wasn't working. And then, so you're going to tell me that Alabama's response was, hey, we're going to go hire this surefire lock, no doubt going to be awesome coach in Nate Oates, who was a math teacher about 5 years ago. Alabama didn't know. We took a chance. Auburn also took a chance on Bruce Pearl because he still had a show cause. He had some baggage. He had a lot of things going on. You didn't know that he was going to replicate the magic that he had at Tennessee, but he did. And again, you didn't know Nate Oates was going to be the coach he is now and run maybe one of the more fun systems in all of college basketball, but he is. And all the things are still true. Bruce Pearl did get in trouble. Nate Oates was a math teacher, but they still turned out to be awesome, which kind of makes it even cooler.
I think I've said this all year, Luke. I think these two teams split. They go 1-1. I think that's the most likely of all of scenarios. I can't see either team sweeping the other. I will change my mind on that if Auburn wins on Saturday. I will say it because I don't think Auburn's going to lose in Neville. I don't think that's crazy to say, but I do think the home teams win in this series this year. So I give Alabama the edge on Saturday.
I do too, and I think you also have to factor in the fact that Alabama is playing a little better right now. I think we've seen, that's one thing I've been saying all year that has been so impressive to me about Auburn is, they've had some close games, but even in those close games, for the most part, they had big leads and they may have just let up a little bit. And in basketball, that's going to happen. That's just the way it is. So, and especially when you can come back if a team hits a couple of threes in a row, next thing you know, it's a close game. But Auburn's been a machine. Like they've just gone through and they've been sort of like Nick Saban joyless murder ball. I mean, they just go through and just pummel people to death, especially in Neville Arena. And then, Janai Broome gets hurt. It changes some things a little bit. They did come back right after that and beat the brakes off Mississippi State, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But you can tell he's not necessarily 100%, not sure what's going on with Chad Baker-Mazara and whether or not he's 100%. But it feels like I don't know necessarily that Auburn's come back to the pack as more teams have elevated their play, like Florida, like Alabama. And I think one of the reasons that Auburn played so well in the very beginning and has continued to play well is that they are so experienced. I mean, you've seen the stat out there where their average age is like 23 years old or something ridiculous. They've got guys that are older than Luka Doncic on the team. That is not a joke. That is just a fact. And so I think that helped them at the beginning of the season to have all this experience, to be very familiar with the system.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and meanwhile, Alabama had a lot of new faces. They got some old faces too, but they had some new faces to try and acclimate to get what's going on. Look, I talked to somebody about Cliff Amore trying to figure out, he was a back to the basket guy at Rutgers. It took him several games to understand, I'm not going to get fed the ball like that much. I'm just going to be like, I'm going to be catching a lot of lobs and getting a lot of offensive rebounds. That's my goal. And I think it took him a minute or two to get acclimated. Now he's playing a lot better. So I think Alabama's playing closer to its ceiling now. And while Auburn is still very, very good, I think other teams are just catching up a little bit.
So I think the player in this game that both fan bases are most aware of is Aiden Holloway. How do you think his performance impacts this game, both on and off the court, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good for Aiden that the first one of these matchups is in Tuscaloosa.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Like, if the first one were in Auburn, because see, this is a guy, in my opinion, who just got his confidence back. Like, he's playing like he was in high school now. And he was a dude. I mean, he just was. Now, it didn't
Which is what Alabama was banking on when they signed him. It's like, there's no way this guy doesn't get better than he was a year ago. And yeah, you're starting to see it.
And I know there are people on Twitter who make the jokes about, well, if he's finally at a place that'll develop him. Look, I think it's more just about being in a more comfortable system for him. Heck, he may just like being in Tuscaloosa more than Auburn or whatever. I mean, it may be a lot.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, he's gotten better. And he, one game he's taken 19 threes. The next game he's taken 2 threes. He's also gotten comfortable with, I can do either one. It's not like I have to force anything. I love watching him play. His little teardrop bank shot on layups that he gets over big men somehow unbelievably is nutty. He is very crafty. And like I said, if he were playing this first game in Auburn, I think the Auburn folks would be relentless. And it could be one of those things that screws with your mind. But because it's in Tuscaloosa, I think it'll give him a chance to be like, okay, we're all just still human here. And then when he goes back to Auburn, he may be a little more prepared.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the final score is?
I hate doing this because, again, it's like you're tied to it as if you said this is just the Bible. But, I mean, I'm going to say something like 92-89 Alabama, and I want it to be something that close. I really do. Of course, as a Bama fan, if we won by 50, I'd be ecstatic. But if we do this and it's a close game and it's fun and it shows the country what we're about, again, I'm with the AHSA radio network. So I've seen, the KT Harrells come through here. And I called the game with DeMarcus Cousins when he played Eric Bledsoe, and DeMarcus Cousins scored the first basket of the game, didn't score again, fouled out, sat on the court, wouldn't move, and nobody knew what to do because they're like, he's 7'1", 300. So unless somebody's got to come along, we ain't getting him out of here. Finally, they talked him off the court. But, I mean, I've seen a lot of good players come through this state that don't necessarily end up at Alabama or Auburn. KT Harrell eventually did, but he didn't start out there.
When the game tips off, the NBA action is getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps me engaged every moment, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3. I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. How about some college basketball action, like a monster Saturday night matchup, 1 versus 2? The Iron Bowl, except basketball. It's Alabama. It's Auburn. Auburn, actually a slight underdog despite being the higher ranked team in the AP poll. FanDuel has Alabama favored by 1.5 right now. In FanDuel, customers, new ones anyway, can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com for your shot at 150 smackaroonies in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars.
Houston and Arizona meeting in a de facto kind of 1 versus 2 mid-season Big 12 championship game kind of atmosphere in Arizona this weekend. A lot of stars on the floor in this one, college basketball stars, guys that have been around the block a little bit. And so the matchups get kind of fun. The matchup to watch, though, is going to be that point guard battle. It's certainly that like guard battle. I say point guard battle, the guard battle between Caleb Love and Miles Uzan. Now, I say guard battle because Caleb Love being a point guard is kind of, he's just a guard. He'll start the offense, he'll initiate the offense, he'll catch and shoot, he'll run off screens. He does all the things for them. Caleb Love is their go-to guy in every single aspect. 15.8 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists per game. And honestly, that assist number feels low, but you remember like with how much they drive, dribbling it a second time typically kills the assist of the first and not. If Caleb sounds familiar, it's not just the heave early this season to help them beat Iowa State. They got him on SportsCenter. Fifth-year guy, was at Carolina when they knocked off Coach Krzyzewski and Duke, was kind of all over the screen when that storyline was playing out. For what it's worth, he was also the last ever Pac-12 Player of the Year for Arizona. Last year, he won Pac-12 Player of the Year. He was an all-ACC freshman when he was at North Carolina. This guy is the constant threat to score. He's getting all of the shots. I want to say, I don't mean that pejoratively, but it makes their offense very predictable. He's getting 14.5 attempts per game from the field and also shooting just over 3 free throws. Their next highest field goal attempts per game is Jaden Bradley at 8.8, right? So that's like a solid 6 more shots per game coming from him than any other single player on Arizona. And frankly, that number gets kind of watered down. You factor in they have a bunch of non-Power 4, non-conference games early in the year where he doesn't play the full 40 minutes, right? He plays about 34 minutes per game. Again, you bump that up for a conference game, especially when this magnitude. He's going to be doing a lot. At 6'4", I think Uzan's the best option to guard him. Pretty thick frame, long enough wingspan to determine to distract him. And I think Uzan's grown into such a great he was a good defender coming in. I think he's grown into a great defender. I think he's the natural matchup there, which means Jaden Bradley, the other guard, I guess probably technically would fit more of a point guard role because when Caleb is off the ball and not bringing it up to initiate offense, Jaden Bradley's the guy orchestrating things. He's 6'3". If his name is familiar, it's because he was at Alabama as a freshman and was in the bench unit at Alabama that came in and beat Houston. Y'all remember that game a couple years ago where Houston was up and then they brought in the bench guys, Nate Oates did, and they just ran like a different offense than Houston had seen. They kind of chipped away and got back at it. Brandon Miller was on that team. Brandon Miller did like nothing against Houston, but the bench guys really kind of saved the game for Alabama. They came back and won in for Tita. One of the only times anyone's ever won in for Tita. It's 7 times is all. And Jaden Bradley was in that bench group. He transferred to Arizona. Was a bench guy last year as well, but was a starting guard this year for them. I think he's an LJ Cryer matchup. Now, when I look at what Jaden Bradley does, he's the next most field goal attempts guy. So I understand some people might be not so quick to put LJ Cryer on him. But I think the deal is athletically, he's a guy that Cryer can keep up with. Again, he's only 6'3", so it's not like Cryer's like really small next to him or anything like that. And frankly, I think we've seen a scrappier version of LJ Cryer in the last 6 or 8 weeks. If LJ Cryer is playing like that, I think he wins this matchup, right? And we know what LJ is going to do on offense, even with the bum pinky. If he can control the Jaden Bradley matchup on the defensive end, I think we're okay. Their third perimeter guy is that Anthony DeLorso guy I told you about that shoots it pretty well. He's listed at 6'6". He's a third-year guy. He was at Campbell, a really small school. Just sometimes see pop up in March kind of stuff. He's a shooter, and he is a movement shooter. He's a catch-and-shoot shooter. He is a guy you cannot let get loose. Again, 42% on 3.5 attempts per game. I wonder, again, if he'd gotten some run early in the season before and had to work his way in as a transfer guy, right? If he'd gotten that run, I wonder if he'd have more authentic look at his stats, because in January, February, he's been pretty solid for them from behind the arc. They've started the last 2 games, a guy named Carter Bryant at the power forward. He's a 6'8" freshman, really athletic, makes really freshman plays. I believe they're going to start Trey Townsend, though, at that spot. Trey Townsend started the previous 22 games, got a concussion. I think he's cleared protocol. If he's cleared protocol and able to play, I don't know why you wouldn't start him if you're Tommy Lloyd over there at Arizona. He's a big, like, bruiser type. He's 6'6", 215, runs, jumps, strong, dives on the floor. He is like, he will pull from 3 on occasion. I guess he's like JoJo Tugler in that way almost. But he's not the shooter type. He is the offensive rebound putback type. He is the dive on the floor, kick it ahead, lead the break with it from his backside kind of type. And hence, and unfortunately, some of that, tough play, got a concussion. He had missed a couple games. I think he's the Jawan Roberts matchup. He'll, again, kind of be there, like, heart and soul and an effort kind of way that way. I mean, everything goes through Caleb Love, but I think they feed off his energy in a weird way. That's kind of hard to quantify, which means that the other big guy, Tobe Awaka, that's the JoJo Tugler matchup. Now, Awaka is a great matchup for Tugler in that they're both about 6'8". They both have really long arms. No one has longer arms than JoJo Tugler, but Tugler's arms Awaka's arms are pretty long wingspan guy. The difference that works for Awaka is he's 250 pounds, right? He's a big, strong, long-armed guy. Played a couple years at Tennessee under Rick Barnes out there. I think the advantage for Tugler in that matchup, well, he's given up about 25, 30, maybe even 35 pounds. I think that Tugler's a lot more finished basketball player, a lot more complete basketball player. And Tugler's not a traditional back-to-the-basket post guy or anything like that, but he's pretty solid inside of 6 or 8 feet with the basketball. I think that still falls to Tugler as far as matchup win, but Awaka is really good. Awaka is one of 2 guys I think I see on this team that would be very much a guy that fits in with the Houston Cougars. The other one is KJ Lewis. KJ Lewis comes off the bench for them. He is all energy all the time. That dude's built like he's 6'4" and a half, 6'5". He lives at 6'5". I think he's closer to 6'4", so I'm going to say 6'4" and a half. When I watch him play, KJ Lewis is a DFW kid from, maybe that's why I think he's a Houston Cougars from Texas, but the dude's built like a linebacker and kind of plays like one too. You saw one in your local intramural league. The guy that just like is super, super physical and like uses all his physical ability to get to the rim. Lewis is just a sophomore, which I was surprised in looking at him. The dude looks like a 24-year-old man. Again, 6'4" and a half, 210, 215. Played at Duncanville, a big program in DFW. He uses all that size and athleticism. There'll be times where he looks like the quickest guy on the floor. There'll be times where he looks like the most explosive guy on the floor. They're playing at home, so he'll probably have a gigantic dunk. He's big, strong, fast in every kind of way, but he uses it to play really hard. And I think that's why he sticks out to me as a guy that Sampson would love to have too. And anytime you see a couple Sampson guys on the other side of the floor, or guys that could play for Kelvin from a style of play kind of way, it's always, man, that could be in for a real fight. Now, I mentioned across the starters, I think Houston wins most of those matchups by slim margins. The interesting thing here will be how the benches go. I mentioned KJ Lewis. He and Terrence Arsenal matchup is very different guys that are both very like genuinely Houston Cougars in how they play, even though they're both technically very different in how they play. But they're both going to be a fun matchup as far as when they both come in the game at that U16. Maybe one of them waits to closer to the U12 timeout, something like that. But they'll both be impactful in this game. And frankly, if the starters come out to be a wash, the KJ Lewis, Terrence Arsenal matchup could win the game in a lot of ways, right? The biggest thing working for Houston is, I think, while the backcourt guys, Lewis and Arsenal, could be almost considered a wash, Houston's bench brings in Javier Francis, and if Javier stays out of foul trouble, he might have the biggest impact on either bench because they don't really bring a big off the bench that helps them like Javier helps Houston. Now, he's kind of functionally a 6 starter. He started some games earlier this year, and so I know that's kind of a gift. Their best bench big there in Arizona is Henry Vesar. I was correct on that pronunciation this week. Vesar, big 7-footer from Estonia, and I don't want to make him sound unathletic because he is more athletic, I think, than he looks like in the warm-up lines. When he's a 7-foot guy walking around from Estonia, he looks a little stiff, right? But he's gonna have trouble keeping up, I think, with some of these guys from Houston. He's much bigger, so he might make up for it and prove me wrong. I think just athletically, he's gonna have trouble keeping up with some of the guys Houston rolls out at him. I think that might impact his minutes too. When they play big teams, Texas Tech has Toppin, or Kansas State rolls out a couple true bigs. He gets like 30 minutes. When they play like Iowa State, that game went to overtime and he played 16, right? So I think that's going to be kind of what you're looking at here.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. Imagine going to the big game this Sunday. That's what a lot of the people around me here on Radio Row are going to do, and the fans who are coming to New Orleans. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have time searching. Inspiration makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and take the work on ticket. Gametime. Download Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels.
So Ole Miss slipped by South Carolina. That was a rough game, but Ole Miss was able to play pretty well in crunch time. Malik Dia completely took that game over. He ended up against South Carolina with 18 points and 3 rebounds, and he was a handful for everybody to deal with on the South Carolina front line. And Ole Miss needed him because at one point he scored 12 consecutive points for the Rebels. Really big time player. And this game was weird because every Ole Miss big man was in foul trouble, had 4 fouls with like 15 minutes to go in the second half. So nobody could literally get a foul. And because of that, South Carolina was able to chip away to the point where they eventually took a lead, but Ole Miss was able to take back control and win the game for their number 19 on the season and their 8th overall. There's a big game against Mississippi State on Saturday. I am curious. The pavilion is sold out on that game. Ole Miss lost against Starkville in overtime. It's a game that, honestly, if Matthew Morrell was not hurt, Ole Miss wins that game. A blocked layup kind of did him a little bit dirty. But Ole Miss lost that game. It started a 3-game skid for the Ole Miss Rebels. And that's kind of that. Since that 3-game skid, Ole Miss, I think, has won 3 or 4 or something like that, 4 or 5. So we'll see if Ole Miss can win the game against Mississippi State, win on the road against Vanderbilt, which is going to be an increasingly tough ball game. Ole Miss could have 10 wins in the SEC. I think the all-time record is 13 for Ole Miss. So we'll see exactly what that looks like as well. The keys to this game is simple. Keep Josh Hubbard from going off and defend the 3-point line aggressively. You need to make Mississippi State beat you with 2-point shots. Don't let them get hot. If they get hot, they could be a problem. But if they're forced to play a slow-down game, an old-style Chris Jans game, not the team that is this year, just an old-style dentist-type game, I think you'll be in good shape there. And also be competitive on the boards versus Mississippi State. Ole Miss got mauled on the boards at Starkville. If Ole Miss can stay within 10 on the rebounds, they are going to have a really good chance to win and stay out of foul trouble, because Mississippi State kind of needs another ref show type game to win this game. They need it to be herky-jerky. They don't need it to be free-flowing. Momentum and everything is on Ole Miss's side, but the refs can take the crowd out of the game by calling stupid fouls. And if they do what they did against South Carolina, it will be problematic. The players you need to watch in this game is the same players just about every game. Dre Davis, who seems to be the big shot maker on this team, he made a unbelievable basket to put up by Ole Miss up by 3 points against South Carolina after his tip-in against LSU. Sean Padula did not play well against the South Carolina Gamecocks. He needs to rebound against Mississippi State. And Matthew Morrell, he's just steady. It's the same thing. There's a lot of times when you look out there, Matthew Morrell, even hurt, is being tasked with guarding the best player on the other team. That is what's going on and how it's done. The prediction of this game, I don't know what it is. My gut tells me Ole Miss is going to win this game by double figures. I think Ole Miss wins 77-65 in the Pavilion for their 9th win of the season, which would guarantee a 500 record in the toughest conference in the history of conferences if you talk to anybody. But 77-65 will do the trick. Chris Beard and the guys are completely ready to go. This is a veteran Ole Miss team, and I am very impressed with what they do in winning time. We talked about the Texas A&M and how they kind of melted down a little bit in that game. It was a situation to where Ole Miss played un-Ole Miss-like in that game. The Texas game, there was a little bit of you could see them like fighting to not let that happen again, and they were able to pull that off. And then after that, Ole Miss just at winning time has been killing people again to the point where you can count what's going on and everything. Ole Miss shot like 85% from free throw line against South Carolina. Jamin Brakefield was a big star there as well.